What's going on, guys? Back at it again with another Bastian build here on the channel. This one I am calling the Marksman, and for obvious reasons I call it the Marksman because he is an archer build. This build ended up being quite effective in the DPS department. Again, I'll say it again as I do in every single video. Companion build video. Companions only do an average between 7 to 10k DPS, so they don't do a ton of damage. They're just designed to help out a little bit. I'm excited to jump into this build though, but first, do me a huge favor, drop a like on this video. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, because it really does help this channel grow. So with that being said, enough yapping, let's jump into this build. Alright, so right off the bat, you're probably going to see some similarities between this build and my Miri Archer build with in the skills department, only because of, it's an Archer build, and I really do find that the skills in Archer, or in the bow skill line, are pretty good for what they are. So, of course, I'm going to want to use them. So first things first, starting off on my number 1 bar is the piercing arrow skill. This skill reads, Bastian DPS plants a masterfully aimed arrow in an enemy's vital spot, dealing 10,324 physical damage. The cooldown is 7.6 because of our current setup, which we'll get into in a little bit, but for this current setup, it's 7.6 seconds of cooldown, which normally it's about 8 seconds, so there's that. This skill is highly effective to start off a fight, but not only that, it does a pretty decent amount of damage for a skill. The best part about this though is the cooldown at 7.6 seconds. You will see this skill being used quite often because of the cooldown being so short, and that is a good thing because the faster you can get off your skills, the more damage you'll be able to dish out. So this skill ends up being pretty fundamental for the build so that you can do constant damage quite often. So moving on to the next skill is Trick Shot. Trick Shot reads as Bastian DPS fires a burst of arrows to pin enemies in front of them, dealing 5,162 physical damage and immobilizing them for 4 seconds. The cooldown is at 15.2 seconds with our current setup. The reason why I like this, it doesn't do a lot of damage, but it does twofold, right? It does the initial 5,162 damage, but it also immobilizes everybody in front of him for 4 seconds. And immobilizations or any rooting effect period is really good at for the simple purpose that if they're not attacking you, you can dish out more damage to them while receiving little in return. And fundamentally, I think this is a great skill. It adds a little bit of damage with a little bit of utility on top of that, and that is why I like this skill. Moving on to the next one is Crag Smash. Crag Smash reads as Bastian DPS hurls a chunk of rock at an enemy, dealing 10,324 physical damage, and the cooldown is at 7.6 seconds. Again, just like Piercing Arrow, this ability will be used quite frequently, so you have 2 skills that are basically going to be taking turns quite frequently because of the low cooldown. Now, if you guys remember my Miri Archer build, I actually had Sniping Silver. This does also 10,324 physical damage, but it also has the added effect of doing double the damage if the enemy is undead, Daedra, or werewolf. The second part of this is very circumstantial, as I said in that video as well. So it ended up being quite superfluous for this specific build, and the biggest letdown of this skill was the 12-second cooldown, which for this build would be 11.4 seconds. So I figured, since it's very circumstantial that you're going to be fighting, undead, Daedra, or werewolves, I figured that it would be a lot more effective to have the faster cooldown with the same amount of physical damage. So this skill ended up being a little bit superior in the damage department because of the quick cooldown, and this is an ability only Bastian could have, so Miri was unable to take advantage of this skill. So there is that. This skill is fantastic in my opinion. Quick cooldown with a pretty decent amount of damage. On top of that, it ends up being a pretty great skill nonetheless. Moving on is Viper's Bite. Viper's Bite is a great ability, guys, but before I get into speaking about it, let's go ahead and read it. Bastian DPS shoots an arrow covered in Bandari poison at an enemy, dealing 5,162 poison damage and an additional 15,484 poison damage over 8 seconds. The cooldown is at 11.4 seconds with our current setup. So this skill does an okay amount of damage at 5,162 damage, but where you get your bang for your buck is in the damage over time at 15,484 poison over 8 seconds. So in 8 seconds, with this specific skill, an enemy will be taking a lot of damage. And when you mix in the quick cooldowns of Piercing Arrow and Crag Smash, it ends up really working out and balancing out really, really well. Last and not least is Drake's Blood. Drake's Blood is one of my favorite skills for Bastion. And that is basically because it heals for 25% of their max health. Now, this skill is fundamentally a lot better for high health builds like tanks and stuff like that, but it ends up still working great nonetheless. If you don't want to use this skill though, an alternative to that would be Kindle. Kindle, in my opinion, deals a lot less healing, but the added benefit is that the cooldown is only 7.6 seconds. So the heal, in my opinion, is a flex spot for you. I personally like Drake's Blood, but if you want to drop in Kindle, that is always good too. This skill also has, on top of that added benefit of being a heal, to reduce the damage taken by 20% for 8 seconds. So it adds to the survivability of Bastion should he be getting attacked. Granted, this is a heal, so he only uses it while he's under 75% health. So if he's getting hit and he's under 75% health, this skill will be not just a heal, but also a level of survivability because of the damage reduction for 20% over 8 seconds. Ends up being a fantastic skill all the way around. I love this skill, guys. So, moving on to the ultimate. Unleashed Rage. Bastian DPS builds up Rage, then unleashes it in a devastating explosion around him. The explosion deals 15,486 flame damage to enemies and stuns them for 4 seconds, while also releasing 4 lines of fire in a cross formation that deals an additional 3,871 flame damage to every enemy hit. So this skill is fantastic if you're up close and personal. So, because of that, this ultimate ends up being not as great as I wish it could be, but it does help nonetheless with the little 4 lines of fire that it does or whatever. But it's only a tiny little 3,871 flame damage. The reason why it's not so good is because this build or this skill has to be up close and personal, and because Bastion is an archer or a bow build, he ends up keeping his distance for the most part, so he, frankly speaking, doesn't get to maximize the effectiveness of this skill. So unfortunately, this is the only skill that we can have as an ultimate for a companion. They only have one, so this is the only thing we can slot. So something is better than nothing, in my opinion, but in this specific case, it's not as good as I wish it could have, but it's not really that important because we'll be doing a ton of damage with our skill set regardless. So that's it for the skills, guys. Let's move in to the gear. So we're gonna start off by saying that I like to emulate my companion builds in a similar fashion that we do as our personal builds, right? We usually, for the most part, wear 2 5P sets and a monster set. So it ends up being 5-2-2. So taking that into perspective, I'm going to start off at the top with the monster set, or the head and shoulders, which are both medium at quickened. Quickened reduces the ability cost by 2.6%. It ends up being just that much faster for you to get back, or for Bastion to get back into his skills, which the skills itself is where all the damage is really being dealt. So if you have a balance of adding damage to your skills and getting them to activate or to to be used a lot faster, you end up doing a lot of damage. So finding that balance is very interesting and very fun in my opinion. So because of that, I ended up going with the 2-piece quicken set, and I think it works great. For the next 5-piece set is going to be the 5 body pieces, also in medium, and that is the aggressive trait. This should be obvious to any build that has to do with DPS, only because it is the trait that adds damage to your, to your skills, to everything really. It adds 1.7% damage to everything per piece, and we're wearing a 5-piece set, so it ends up being a pretty healthy amount of added damage on top of all your skills. So yeah, there's that. So this one's the obvious set. Last but not least though is Shattering. Shattering adds penetration by 1,300 penetration to your attacks, and that's gonna be for all the jewelry. And for the weapon adds an added 2,600 because it acts as a 2-piece, even on companions. So Shattering ends up adding a pretty healthy amount of, armor penetration to all of his attacks. And of course, if you can go through some of the enemy's armor, it ends up, adding to the damage nonetheless. And I think mobs, if I'm not mistaken, you guys could correct me if I'm incorrect in the comment section down below, but I think enemies have an average of like 18,000 armor or something like that. I could be wrong. So if you can take that armor down a little bit, you'd be doing more damage. So there's that. Let's go over to the style. Alright guys, so in terms of style, he is wearing a costume, which is the Centurion field armor that you can get from the Crown Shop, or I think you can get it in Crown crates too, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's a Crown Shop item. In terms of dyes, we have Master Gold, Red Diamond, of course, and Book Cover Red. As far as the weapon, don't mind the actual body pieces, this is just my default look. But I do have Imperial Bull 4, Book Cover Brown, Cyrodiilic Steel, and Red Diamond. It ends up looking quite fantastic, if I do say so myself. And I think it looks good overall. Looks like a very dirty look. But yeah, let's go check out what this build can do on a world boss. So there you have it, guys. This build ended up being one of the higher damage dealing DPS builds that I have currently in the channel. It ended up being a very good build overall. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it too, let me know down in the comment section, because it really lets me know if you guys are enjoying these builds or not. We did have another player, as you guys saw, come in and start doing damage, but I think the player understood what we were trying to do and kind of let us do our own thing, as you guys saw. Now, with that being said, their companion, who was also an archer, was also shooting and lobbing some arrows at the direction of the enemy, but I think overall we ended up getting a good idea of the kind of damage that you could do, or Bastian can do, with this current setup. I want to emphasize one more time though that companions are only meant to assist in the DPS, not to do all the DPS. So if you take your damage with Bastian's additive damage on top of that, it ends up being a pretty healthy amount of damage, especially if you're not good at the whole light attack weaving and everything of that kind of that nature. So overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this build. If you did too, let me know down in the comment section. Drop a like on this video. Also subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, because it really does help this channel grow. So with that being said, catch you guys in the next one. Deuces.